The Old West is often remembered as a romanticized time of cowboys, outlaws, and lawmen, but beneath the myths lie stories so unbelievable and shocking that they've been buried in history. Today, we'll uncover 3 insane stories from the Old West that they don't want you to know. Stories of hidden treasures, deadly feuds, and brutal conflicts that were quietly erased from the history books. Number 1. The Curse of the Lost Dutchman's Mine. The story of the Lost Dutchman's Mine is not just a simple tale of hidden gold, it's a complex web of legend, murder, and mystery. The origin of this legend can be traced back to the early 1800s with the Peralta family, wealthy Mexican cattle ranchers who allegedly discovered a rich gold vein in the Superstition Mountains. They are said to have extracted vast amounts of gold until, during one of their return trips to Mexico, they were ambushed by Apache warriors, leading to a massacre that left only a few survivors. One of these survivors supposedly gave Jacob Waltz a map to the mine as a reward for helping them. This exchange set the stage for what would become one of the most intriguing mysteries of the Old West. Jacob Waltz, a German immigrant, arrived in Arizona in the 1860s. According to legend, he discovered the mine and, along with his partner Jacob Weiser, began extracting its riches. The exact circumstances of Weiser's fate are unclear. Some versions of the tale suggest he was killed by the Apache, while others imply, regardless of how he met his end, Weiser's death added a layer of grim intrigue to the legend. Waltz is said to have stashed the gold in various hidden caches throughout the Superstition Mountains. He would occasionally appear in Phoenix with saddlebags full of gold, but when questioned about its source, he provided cryptic or contradictory directions, adding to the mine's mystery. After Waltz's death in 1891, numerous people claimed to have discovered the mine or parts of it, leading to a flood of treasure hunters seeking its riches. Reports in newspapers from the early 1900s frequently announced the rediscovery of the mine, with varying degrees of success. Some searchers extracted significant amounts of gold from locations they believed to be the fabled mine, only to either disappear mysteriously or be killed before they could reveal its exact location. One man, in the early 1900s, supposedly found the mine but died before he could return, leaving only more questions. The Peralta stones, discovered in 1949, added another layer of mystery. These stones bore carvings of maps and symbols believed to lead to the mine. Some of the carvings included the words Sonora, Mexico, and depicted a priest holding a cross, indicating possible religious significance or a hidden connection to the Peralta family. The authenticity of these stones has been hotly debated, with some experts arguing that they were made with modern tools, suggesting they could be a hoax. Yet, these stones continue to captivate and inspire treasure hunters, with replicas displayed in museums and the originals kept under lock and key by historians. What makes the Lost Dutchman's Mine story even more intriguing is the modern-day involvement of government regulations. The Superstition Wilderness was declared a national wilderness area in 1964, and in 1984, prospecting and digging in the area were officially banned by the federal government. This move sparked numerous conspiracy theories. Some believe the government is trying to prevent further deaths, while others speculate that authorities might have already discovered the mine and are keeping it. Despite these restrictions, many still venture into the Superstition Mountains in search of the mine. Notably, a group called Arcana Exploration and Discovery claimed to have found the mine in 2015 after conducting 4 expeditions. They provided photographic evidence of clues matching those described in the legend, but have kept the location undisclosed, maintaining the mine's aura of mystery. This modern-day exploration adds a new chapter to the enduring myth, suggesting that the legend is more than just a tale passed down through generations. The curse associated with the mine is one of its most chilling aspects. Numerous treasure hunters have died under mysterious circumstances, often in brutal or unexplained ways. One of the more recent tragedies involved a man named Jesse Capon, who vanished in 2009 while searching for the mine. His body was discovered 3 years later, hidden in a crevasse 35 feet up a cliff. His death is just one of many that perpetuate the belief that the mine is cursed and protected by supernatural forces or the spirits of those who died seeking it. Number 2. The Hidden War of the Regulators and Moderators. The Regulator-Moderator War, also known as the Shelby County War, was a brutal conflict in East Texas during the 1840s. Unlike the more romanticized shootouts of the Old West, this was a large-scale, violent feud between two factions, the Regulators and the Moderators. The roots of this conflict lay in land disputes, political corruption. At the time, Texas was transitioning from an independent republic to a state of the United States, leading to a power vacuum and legal chaos. Land fraud was rampant, with both sides accusing each other of theft, forgery, and murder. The Regulators, led by Charles W. Jackson and later by Edward Merchant, initially sought to bring order to the region by targeting outlaws and settling land disputes. However, their methods were harsh, involving lynchings, vigilantism, and extrajudicial executions. As their power grew, they began to act more like a rogue militia than a force for justice. This brutality led to the formation of the Moderators, a faction that initially sought to counter the Regulators' excesses. However, they quickly became as violent and ruthless as their adversaries. The Moderators, led by figures such as Alfred George and Edward Burleson, began to retaliate with their own brand of vigilante justice, resulting in a cycle of retribution that engulfed the region in bloodshed. Both sides engaged in guerrilla warfare tactics, including ambushes and raids on settlements. They utilized a network of spies and informants, which further escalated the violence. This wasn't just a series of isolated incidents, it was a sustained campaign that involved hundreds of men. Entire communities were drawn into the conflict, forced to choose sides or face the threat of violence themselves. Property was seized, homes were burned, and those suspected of sympathizing with the enemy were often executed without trial. This period turned East Texas into a war zone, where the concept of justice was twisted into a tool for personal vendettas. The Texas government, struggling to assert control over the lawless region, declared martial law in Shelby County in 1844. Governor Sam Houston sent in the Texas militia, led by General James Smith, to. However, the intervention only temporarily suppressed the violence. The deep-seated animosities between the factions continued to simmer, leading to sporadic clashes even after the official end of the war in 1844. Some accounts suggest that local law enforcement was either complicit or powerless to stop the atrocities committed by both sides, further highlighting the breakdown of law and order during this time. The Regulator-Moderator War is a stark contrast to the sanitized versions of frontier justice often depicted in popular culture. It reveals a grim reality where the line between lawmen and outlaws was blurred. Both the Regulators and Moderators justified their actions under the guise of enforcing justice, but their methods were brutal and often indiscriminate. Public hangings, torture, and the use of hired guns were commonplace. The war's legacy is one of lawlessness, where the rule of might prevailed over any formal legal system. This conflict is frequently overshadowed by more famous events in Western history, possibly because it exposes the darker, more chaotic aspects of frontier life, where violence and power struggles dictated the course of justice. Number 3. The Wounded Knee Massacre and the Ghost Dance Suppression. The Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890 was a culmination of tension, misunderstanding, and deliberate suppression of Native. The massacre's roots trace back to the ghost dance movement, which began in This spiritual movement, initiated by the Paiute prophet Wovoka, promised the return of ancestors, the vanishing of white settlers, and the restoration of the Native American way of life. The ghost dance spread rapidly among various tribes, including the Lakota Sioux, who had suffered greatly from the U.S. government's forced relocations, broken treaties, and destruction of the buffalo, their primary food source. The U.S. government and settlers viewed the ghost dance as a sign of impending rebellion. The movement's peaceful nature was ignored. Instead, it was perceived as a rallying call for. Reports of wild dancing among the Lakota reached Washington, D.C., and local authorities in South Dakota, sparking widespread. The government's decision to act swiftly and suppress the movement was further fueled by the sensationalist media of the time, which exaggerated the perceived threat. Tensions escalated in December 1890 when the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry, a regiment with a history tied to the infamous Battle of Little Bighorn, surrounded a group of Lakota Sioux near Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. The group, which included many women and children, had been trying to find refuge from the On December 29, 1890, the situation reached a breaking point when soldiers attempted to disarm the Lakota. Accounts vary on how the violence started, but it is widely believed that a scuffle over a rifle led to the soldiers opening fire. The massacre was swift and brutal. Soldiers fired indiscriminately, using rapid-fire Hotchkiss guns, which were mounted and capable of unleashing a devastating barrage of bullets. The Lakota, most of whom were unarmed, stood no chance against the overwhelming firepower. Estimates suggest that around 300 Lakota men, women, and children were killed in the massacre, their bodies left to freeze in the snow. The soldiers showed little distinction between combatants and non-combatants, and many victims were shot as they fled or tried to protect their families. The brutality of the event was later compounded by the fact that the U.S. government awarded 20 medals of honor to soldiers involved in the massacre, a decision that has been widely condemned as a grotesque celebration of what was, in reality, an atrocity. The aftermath of the massacre had a profound effect on Native American communities and their cultural practices. The ghost dance, which had once been a symbol of hope, was in the years following Wounded Knee. The U.S. government intensified its efforts to assimilate Native Americans, banning traditional ceremonies and forcibly sending children to boarding schools where they were stripped of their language and culture. Wounded Knee effectively marked the end of organized Native American resistance to U.S. expansion and solidified the government's control over the tribe. The Wounded Knee Massacre has often been sanitized or minimized in American historical narrative. It is a story of violent cultural suppression and systemic injustice that challenges the myth of the West as a place of opportunity and freedom. For many years, the massacre was referred to in terms that suggested it was a battle rather than a one-sided slaughter. This narrative suited a vision of American expansion that portrayed it as an inevitable and just process, ignoring the devastating impact on the indigenous population. The reluctance to fully acknowledge the massacre's reality speaks to a broader discomfort with confronting the darker aspects of American history, particularly those involving the treatment of Native American peoples. These three stories, the Lost Dutchman's Mine, the Regulator-Moderator War, and the Wounded Knee Massacre, are not the tales of heroism and adventure we often associate with the Old West. They are stories of greed, violence, and tragedy that paint a far more complex and often brutal picture of the American frontier. They are tales that many would prefer to keep hidden, but in uncovering them, we gain a truer understanding of what the Old West was really like.